Welcome back, guys. I'm excited to see you guys here tonight. I know it looks a little bit different. On Tuesday night, we did a show, post-game review of the national championship game. You can go back and view that Between the Tackles podcast, Alabama rolls Ohio State. And we kind of looked at some other things as well. But tonight is our show. If you'll notice, I'll put it up, tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning I'll put it up. It's actually not Friday night. Usually we'll do them on Friday night, but tonight I'm going to go out of town tomorrow, so I won't be in a safe studio in my house. But I won't be in tomorrow, so I'm going to go ahead and do one early tonight, just kind of breaking a couple things down, not going in depth or not going super in depth on a lot of things like we did the game last week. But I wanted to get one out to y'all. Couldn't, leave y'all with a week of not having one. I couldn't be a good host if I didn't do that. But I wanted to talk about a couple things tonight. And so, as you can see behind me, this is the Between the Tackles podcast. As you probably can't see behind me, this is still the Between the Tackles podcast. Behind me, I think it's actually flipped on your screen. I think it reads Tackles the Between on your side. So, I apologize. We'll get that fixed. I have a buddy of mine helping me with the logo, and he's going to build that for me. So I'm really excited about that. We've got a lot of things going well here, and we're going to get a lot of good things coming in the future. We'll start doing more live shows. We're going to make this an audio podcast as well. So really excited. I'm going to get a better camera equipment so that it looks a little more clear and not hazy like I'm doing this in the early 2000s. So looking really, really forward to that. But tonight, let's jump right in. Got a couple things to look at. And with that, let's get started. So Tennessee, right? The volunteer program, the team many expected to be a top 3 team in the SEC East this year, maybe competing with Florida and Georgia. Didn't really see a lot of picks going into the season on whether or not they would actually win the division. But everybody expected them to take the next step. What in the world is going on right now at Tennessee, though? Imagine this. So imagine you grow up in your house, you're a kid again, and you and your brother have some chores to do, otherwise you may get grounded. Yes, I am giving you a picture of my childhood. But you have chores to do, and whether that's vacuuming, sweeping, mopping, ironing, whatever that chore may be, cleaning the windows, cleaning the mirrors in the bathrooms, cleaning the pool, whatever your chore is, whatever your parents made you do, imagine you had to do that. So you and your brother do your chores, but you do them poorly, as some kids do, and you don't fix it when your parents tell you, and all of a sudden you're grounded. So your punishment as a kid, if you're an outside kid, maybe that was a month, or not a month. If you're going out, your parents want you outside, okay? Your parents don't want you in the house with them 24/7. So they want you to go waste some energy outside. So let's just say you're grounded from TV for about a month, okay? So it's about day 3, day 4, really soon on in the process, and you walk into the bedroom and your brother's there watching, I don't know, Nickelodeon during that time. Maybe it's, from my standpoint, that would have been SpongeBob. If it was Cartoon Network, it may have been Ed, Edd and Eddy, or Courage the Cowardly Dog, something like that. So imagine like going 3-4 days into that, and you're already you walk in, your brother already watching, television again, and you go, what's going on? That is similar to what we're seeing at Tennessee right now. If you're not caught up, last week, about a week and a half ago, Tennessee got in trouble with some recruiting violations. So the heads of the Tennessee got together and hired an investigation firm to go in and see if there was any actual findings of recruiting violations. Now, that's kind of weird. It's not something that the NCAA would do unless your school was trying to get out ahead of it. There's another particular school down in the Bayou. We won't mention names so far because the NCAA hasn't started their investigation on it yet, but they're going to get hit with a heavy investigation. But normally, typically, your school doesn't, hire their own investigation firm to find out what they did, and so they can look into you. That really kind of doesn't happen. But what we've seen during that time, in the past week and a half, is Jeremy Pruitt, the head coach at the University of Tennessee, has gotten a hiring freeze placed on him by the head departments of the school. What that means, basically, in terms, is they don't want Jeremy Pruitt signing, say he wants to fire Jim Chaney, hire a new offensive coordinator. That's not happening anyway. But say he's wanting to move on there, or he wants to move on from a particular position coach, or wants to move on from a defensive coordinator, or we'll get to in a second. But maybe he wants to move on, sign a new guy. Well, Tennessee's not allowing him to do that. They're not allowing him to sign a guy or sign a few coaches to 2 or 3 year contracts when they don't even know if he's going to be retained. And that's the kind of the thought process going into it. But here's the weird thing, and this is kind of going back to what we talked about with the scenario of doing your chores. It just came out, I believe it was yesterday, on Wednesday, that Jeremy Pruitt was allowed to hire Kevin Steele from Auburn. Now, we don't know the particular role. I don't think it's been released yet whether or not he's going to be a defensive coordinator, if he's just going to be an on-the-field role as an analyst. Coach Clinic U over there in Alabama does something similar where they'll just hire guys who've been former head coaches. Steve Sarkisian is one of their recent hires who ended up going and now taking the head coaching job at Texas. So maybe it's something like that. Who knows? The difference is, or the purpose of this whole entire argument is, what's crazy is the University of Tennessee is now just allowing him to do it after, a week and a half? So what, did you just change your mind? Here's the thing I think that's going to end up happening, or at least what we're looking at right now. So in the scenario that we're at, I think Tennessee wants to move on from Jeremy Pruitt. I think the reason they hired this investigation firm, the reason why they placed a hiring freeze on Jeremy Pruitt during that time, which is blown up now, but I think the reason why they started doing that was because they wanted to find a way to get rid of Jeremy Pruitt because of the season that he just had. Now, he only had, I believe it was a 2-win season, so it wasn't, fantastic by any stretch of the imagination, but they're trying to move on from him. Here's kind of my point to that whole scenario. Now, what I won't do, throughout the entire process of the show, I am a fan of college football. I love college football. I love watching. I will sit, honestly, guys, like many of you, I will wake up in the morning at 9 a.m., watch College Game Day until 12, flip on the best game at noon, flip on the best game at 3:30, flip on the best game at 6, 7:30, flip on the best game at 8 for the nightcap, maybe watch Pac-12 after dark. But I will try not to show what my fandom is for those of you who don't know me, because I don't want to come off as seeing my bias. So just throwing that out there, I'm not a Tennessee fan by any means, but I do watch the program a lot. And I say that to say this: I'm never going to advocate for a coach to be fired. I'm never going to advocate on this show for someone to lose their job. I don't think that's a good thing for news journalist or sports media journalist if you're not covering a specific team. Now, maybe if you're covering a specific team, you may show reports of what's going on with inside the program. Maybe you want to have an opinion-related show, but I'm not really going to do that. What I'll tell you is some concerns I have within the program, or what I think a coach is doing well in a program. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm really not going to call for someone's job. I'll never really do that to anyone on the show. But what I will say, for me personally, going in the opposite direction, I didn't think there was anything that Jeremy Pruitt could do this year that would cause me to want to fire him. And so I know, and I know, that the idea is, well, he had a 2-win season. He had his 5-star senior quarterback who, in all intents and purposes, didn't pan out as a 5-star. He's not terrible by any means. He just didn't pan out as a 5-star, but he had an experienced offensive line. He had a great run game. The defense was supposed to be pretty solid this year. What happened? I don't know, guys. But I can tell you, just look at the entire landscape of college football. What happened this year? It was weird. And that's why I'm not firing Jeremy Pruitt if I'm Tennessee. Going into this season, we talked about at the beginning of the show that there was a lot of lofty expectations for Tennessee. Now, again, not many people picked them to win the division, but people expected them to compete with Georgia, who didn't have a starting quarterback coming into the year because their number 1 option opted out and their number 2 option was hurt. They expected them to compete with Florida. They expected them to at least get the 3rd place in the division at the very least, and that didn't end up happening. But it's a weird season, guys. 6-7 months ago, we didn't even know if we were going to have one. And so that's why I'm going into it. Unless the coach was already on the hot seat per se and was already in the school itself and the board was already looking at firing them, that's a little bit different because you already had a reason going in. If you remember last year, coming into this season, other than the position groups that Tennessee had, the reason why a lot of people were excited about them is they were riding the conference's best winning streak coming in. Now, you can say, well, look at their strength of schedule. Now, I probably would agree with you on who they played, but they're still riding that winning streak. Jeremy Pruitt still looked like he was turning the corner there in Tennessee, but it just didn't work out. I mean, they're not the only program in the country where it didn't work out. Look at Penn State. Penn State was ranked in the top 25 coming into this year, and they were going to say, people were saying, Ohio State doesn't have the most challenging schedule this year, but at least they'll have to play Penn State. Now, there weren't any fans. That may have something a little bit to do with it, but Penn State wasn't the same Penn State program this year. You're not hearing them calling for, well, you may hear some, but you're not, for the overall masses, hearing them calling for James Franklin's job. They're not putting a hiring freeze on James Franklin right now. They're not going out of their way to investigate James Franklin or trying to find a way to get him out of there. They want James Franklin to return. Look at Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Okay, listen, I know Tennessee fans are going to say, listen, our program is better. It has been better. This Tennessee program has not been the same program since the early 2000s and the 90s. This is not the same team. Your program is very identical, at least in terms of what you think success is, as Penn State's and Michigan's progress going forward. Okay, you're not competing for national championships right now at Tennessee. I think it's hard to expect you to compete in a division where your rival down the road is consistently signing top 3 classes, and your other rival just got done with one of their best offensive performances in the last 10 years. So, for one, I get the anger over a 2-win season when you had so much hype going in. I understand, trust me, I get that. I was disappointed in Tennessee. I was disappointed in Jeremy Pruitt. But I'm not firing him in a weird COVID year when we didn't even have a full season. Maybe things are different. Maybe you have a non-conference schedule that's a little bit easier and you don't start Jarrett Garantano. Maybe you start a different guy, as they did going at the end of the year, and maybe things are different. Maybe you're not looking at a 2-win season. Maybe you're not looking at an 8 or 9-win season, but you're certainly not looking at a 2-win season. And so I understand the questions coming in, and the questions next year are more the same. I mean, you've got offensive line questions, especially if a lot of those guys on that line move off to the NFL. You have, I believe it's Ty Chandler transferring in the backfield. I mean, you're going to have a quarterback issue. Jarrett Garantano, who I didn't expect to start in the program next year. I think they were moving in a different direction regardless, but he's going on. Sorry, guys, hit that. But he's moving on to Washington State. So now you have the next guy up who you have been preparing, and he looked like he can be a pretty good quarterback. But you have questions nonetheless, and I think Kevin Steele, if he's going to come into a defensive coordinator role, or if he's at least going to be in the room, it'll be helpful because he's an excellent defensive coordinator. But there are questions, and so what I say all that to say, I understand if you're putting Jeremy Pruitt on the hot seat going into 2021 and saying, you know what, if he is midway through the year and his record really doesn't look that great, or at least to the expectations that we hold for him, fine. Then move on from him in 2021. Y'all, listen, the Tennessee program is so late in the game, you're not going to get a great coach. This is what happened 2 years ago when you hired Jeremy Pruitt. You had a lot of guys that you thought that you could get. Your AD at the time was going to go interview Mike Leach. That got turned down. You had Greg Schiano, and Tennessee fans basically ran him out of the building, and you landed in with Jeremy Pruitt, who in all purposes looked like a really good hire that you just kind of, wet the bed at first, and then you landed on a really good hire. I still think Jeremy Pruitt can work out. I do. But I think he has, a ways to go, and like I said, if you want to put him on the hot seat going into 2021, that's fine. I get it. And then if he has a bad season, you say, well, you know what, we're going to move on from you, and whether you want to place Kevin Steele on an interim or permanent basis, okay, that makes sense. I just don't understand firing him at the end of 2020 in a COVID year when things are going horribly wrong. If anybody was going to fire anybody, why doesn't Florida State fire Mike Norvell right now? I mean, they had a lot of guys leave. They had a season in turmoil. There was a call into question by Clemson and Dabo Swinney whether or not they even wanted to play at the end of the season. But FSU's not firing Mike Norvell. Why? Because they understand it's a weird year. For the most part, this, for some teams, was a throwaway year. A lot of teams didn't know what players they were going to have. They didn't know what games they were going to play because it was a week-by-week basis. Every team basically had a game being postponed or canceled outright. So no one knew what was going to happen. So why fire a guy who had a bad year in a bad year. So all of that to say, listen, I think Jeremy Pruitt needs one more year. Again, if you're going to fire him at the end of next year, that's fine. I understand that. I'm not going to advocate for that. I still think he's a good coach. And guys, if you fire him, he's going to have 8, 9, 10 offers as a defensive coordinator right as soon as that word goes out from the Tennessee program. Jeremy Pruitt, breaking news, Jeremy Pruitt is fired. Alabama's going to offer him. Florida may offer him. I mean, he's going to have offers out the wazoo. He is a great defensive mind. He just needs to put things together. So I think, for this Jeremy Pruitt experience, he needs one more year. I think it's only fair to give the guy one more year. Now moving on to some NFL stuff to close out the show. I'll be quick with this, guys. I'm going to cover football for most of the. I did again. I've got to stop doing that. That's not a good thing. But going over the entire NFL, I'm not really going to do that as much. Mainly, the show is going to be covering college football, but the NFL playoffs are going on, which is important, and we have football, guys. So we're going to talk about that. So going into the Saturday slate, the first game of the week, we have the Rams at the Packers. Now, if you watched the Rams at the Seahawks last year, last week, there was many who picked Seattle to win that game. I actually picked the Rams. Can't prove that to you. Don't believe me. It's fine. I understand that. I trusted Sean McVay a little bit more than Brian Schottenheimer. Now, Brian Schottenheimer's not the head coach, and he's not even the offensive coordinator anymore at Seattle. But I thought the Rams offense could do well. And yes, John Wolford started the game at quarterback for the Rams. They weren't really looking at playing Jared Goff until John ended up getting hurt, and they subbed Goff in there, and the rest is history. They beat Seattle, and they're in the game now. I do think Jared Goff's going to start this game against the Packers, but the Packers have been my NFC Championship pick for at least half the year. They've just been, from wire to wire, I think, the best team in the NFC. Aaron Rodgers, who people said had a bad year, some people said had a bad year last year, had what he calls, and he called this on the Pat McAfee show during the interview, he said, a bad year for me is a career year for most guys. Aaron Rodgers is not going anywhere. Aaron Rodgers is a great quarterback, and he's proven that this year with Devontae Adams, with the run game of Aaron Jones. I think this is just a little bit too much to handle, especially traveling across from LA to Green Bay, Wisconsin. I think this is going to be too much for them to handle. I don't expect a blowout or anything like that. The line right now is 6.5 at Green Bay, meaning Green Bay is a 6.5 point favorite. I'm taking Green Bay, and I'm taking them to cover. I actually think they win this game probably by 10 points. That's what I'm going with. That's the line I'm putting it at. Again, I told you guys last week, this is not a betting show. I'm giving you what the line says and what I believe will end up happening. So I do believe the Packers will cover in this game, and I believe they'll go into the NFC Championship against, well, we'll talk about that in a second. So the next game in the Saturday slate is the Ravens at Bills. This is going to be a great game. This is a game I'm really, really looking forward to, probably the most outside of the Buccaneers and Saints game in this weekend, in this divisional round weekend. This is going to be really good. The storyline coming in to this postseason was the Tennessee Titans knocked off the Baltimore Ravens at home last year, and the question was, well, Lamar Jackson has never won a playoff game. At what point is he going to take that next step? And he did. He won this week. He won last week. He beat the same Tennessee Titans team, this time at their place, to have an opportunity to play the Bills. So they're playing and they're peaking at a higher level right now. But there it goes, again. But the Bills, I think, are playing better football at the moment. I think they could have been beaten by the Colts last week if the Colts had a more dynamic quarterback, and I think that kind of woken them up. Now, I could be wrong. The line is only at 2.5. So basically what they're saying is they're basically just giving the Bills home field advantage. Anything under 3 points is you're basically just giving the home field advantage line to the team. So with Stephon Diggs, with their run game, with Josh Allen, the way they play with Brian Daboll calling plays, personally, I'm going to go with the Buffalo Bills in this game. I think that the trajectory of the AFC has been the Bills making the AFC Championship game. So I think they'll end up winning this game. I do think it'll be a close game. I'm going to take the Bills to cover. I think they win by a field goal. So that's not really saying much. The line's at 2.5. That can change in the next hour. It's 10:50 on a Thursday night right now, and that can change by midnight tonight. So At least I think they're going to win. I think they're going to win by a field goal as they did on Sunday. So I'm taking the Bills and the Packers to win on Saturday. Now going into Sunday, the first game of the day is the Browns at the Chiefs. Man, I was happy for the Browns. They haven't won a playoff game in a long time, and they were playing a Steelers team who many, Steelers players, if you haven't heard about it, doesn't really matter now. I guess you can go back and watch interviews. They were saying, the Browns are still the Browns. They're not the team that we are. We've got Big Ben. We've got Juju. We've got James Conner. We got Minka Fitzpatrick. We got this entire team. And then 28-0 happens in the first quarter. Big Ben throws 4 interceptions. He ends up throwing 4 touchdowns too, but it kind of turnover margin cancels each other out really. But, Browns came out at the end of that and won that game and now have the right to play the Chiefs. I think this is a sneaky game for the Chiefs. It is the Chiefs are a 10-point favorite. I expect the Chiefs to win this game, but I do not expect them to cover, which means I do not expect them to win by 10+. I think the Chiefs win this game by a touchdown. I think you're going to go into this game. The Chiefs are a better football team. They have more weapons. They're, at least talent-wise, they're still most, in my mind, now I know there's a question with Saints from top to bottom, and I understand that, but in my mind, the Chiefs are still the most talented team in the playoffs and in the NFL. So I'm taking the Chiefs, but that's not to say that I don't think the Browns are going to play well. For one, you have to deal with the two-headed monster in Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Nick Chubb is arguably put his name in a top 5 running backs question going into next year or even right now. I mean, he has over 1,000 yards after still missing 5 games this year, so he's going to be a monster. And then you've got his backup, basically a thunder and a lightning, and Kareem Hunt coming in, which if they perform at a high level and the offensive line is built to run the football, then they can run Baker Mayfield off play action, which is something he will succeed in if he can move around the pocket too. And you got guys like Jarvis Landry downfield opened up. So, and Austin Hooper, their free agent from Atlanta this past year. So I think they'll end up playing pretty well, and that's why I think the game will be close. I think it'll be closer than people expect. I think they expect the Chiefs to come in here and run over the Cleveland Browns. I don't expect that to happen. I do expect the Browns to play a competitive game. I think it'll be a really good game from Baker in this game. I really do. I think that they're going to have a good success running the football, and that'll open up plays for him, and that's why I think it'll be close in the end, but I am taking the Chiefs. It's just going to be hard not to take the Chiefs. So, in the final game, going into a Sunday night, we have the Buccaneers at the Saints. This is the toughest game for me to pick. And I'm going to go a little unconventional. The Saints are a 3-point favorite in this game. This is the first game of the week, and I'm not taking the favorite. I'm actually taking not only the Buccaneers to cover, but I'm taking them to win this game outright. And that may seem like dumb logic, and I understand that. I get that. Listen, because if you're saying that, then you're saying based off what you've seen already happen. So the first 2 weeks, or not the first 2 weeks, but the first 2 games, this is basically the rubber match in terms because the Buccaneers hadn't won either of the games they played against Drew Brees' Saints. Tom Brady and the Buccaneers got blown out. So you can say, like, okay, 1 game may be a fluke. 1 game we just had a bad game. 2 games is a trend. So typically when you see things like that, you'll say, okay, well, that just means they're the better team, especially in a blowout fashion. It's not like the Buccaneers went and lost on 2 last-second field goals. They lost by multiple touchdowns. In both of those games, the Buccaneers were outscored by a tune of 72-31. They were blown out of those games, and Tom Brady did not look good in either game. He didn't. The offense didn't look good. The defense gave up a lot. So I understand what I am saying kind of probably sounds dumb to a lot of people. It sounds dumb with conventional wisdom, especially when the Saints are playing at home. But I'm picking the Buccaneers to win this game. I think the Buccaneers have gotten better as the season went along. I think the Buccaneers and Tom Brady on the offense have clicked a lot better. Their defense is what concerns me the most. I don't think they're going to be able to stop New Orleans' passing attack. I just really haven't trusted the back end of their defense that much. But what I think ends up happening is, I'm going to call it here. So if I'm wrong, I'll apologize on the show next week and we'll talk about it. But I think Antoine Winfield, the safety for the Buccaneers, makes a timely interception on Drew Brees, and Tom Brady, who many consider to be the greatest of all time, drives down the field and wins the game against the Buccaneers, setting up an NFC Championship game with the Green Bay Packers. And so in that, from Saturday, I have the Packers and the Bills winning. On Sunday, I have the Chiefs and the Saints winning. So in the NFC Championship, we have the Buccaneers heading to Green Bay. And in the AFC Championship, we have what I think would be the game of the year, the Bills at the Chiefs. So, guys, I appreciate you joining me again this week. I'm going to have this up on tomorrow morning, which will be on your feed on Friday. So you guys can take a look at this, give me some feedback, engage with me in the comment section. Tell me what you think about the Tennessee program. Tell me if you think that Jeremy Pruitt should be gone. Tell me why you think he should be gone. And then if you're talking about the playoff games coming up in the NFL, tell me what you who you think is going to win, who you got, why you got them. Give me some scores, and we'll engage and have a fun time in the comment section. But for everybody, I'm Alex Joyce. This is the Between the Tackles podcast. I'll see you guys next week.